Notacon.
At any rate, to give you a little background on FARK, some of you may have heard this before, some of you may have not, but about 7 years ago, FARK looked like this. That was essentially all that was there. In 1997, I reserved the domain name because it was available, and at the time there was this buzz about how all the four-letter domain names were about to disappear, so I figured I better grab one before they took off. And at the time, I didn't have any good idea for what to put there. And it just so happened the day that I reserved the domain name, somebody sent me this picture of the squirrel with their large nuts. Incidentally, not Photoshopped. That's an honest-to-God picture. I've actually since come into contact with the guy that took the photo. Every time somebody sends me a picture of that guy on somebody's T-shirt or whatever, a public sighting, I'll forward it to him because almost always it's not licensed. And the guy's a pretty cool guy, actually. He told us we could go ahead and use that whenever we wanted to as long as we gave him proper attribution, and so try to help him out. But he confided to me once that he says that he's a photographer that's been in the business for 30 years, has taken probably upwards of 100,000 photographs, and to have the one picture of his entire career that everybody has seen be this is pretty humbling. But at any rate, I put that up there because I didn't have a good idea for a website, and I decided I wasn't going to actually put anything up until I had a good idea for a website. One night in 1999, I had two good ideas for a website. One was what eventually became FARK. The other was a Indian curry recipe database, because I'm a huge fan of curries, and there's only one other website that I know out there that you can actually find a good collection of curry recipes at. So there was an obvious, niche waiting to be filled. And I, honest to God, sat up that night thinking, which one should I do? And I went back and forth in my head over and over again, and finally said, well, I'll give the news thing a shot. We'll see what happens. Started out, it looks pretty much like it did today. Less advertising, obviously, because we didn't have any. And just kind of updated it on a manual basis, rolled it out the door in February of 1999. Added comments about a year and a half later. It ended up going from 50,000 page views the first year to 1 million the second year, which was phenomenal, until we ended up hitting last year. It was 450 million page views. That's somewhere north of most United States daily newspapers. We're just slightly ahead of Chicago Sun-Times. We're just slightly behind the LA Times, depending on what's going on. They end up having interesting spikes that don't quite mesh our traffic levels. I came to find out, interestingly, over the course of doing FARK and talking to a whole bunch of people that do newspapers, there's a strange conundrum that most local newspaper websites have, and that is that all of their traffic comes in the morning between 8 and 11 o'clock in the morning. And they started inviting me to come to their conferences because they were trying to figure out why our traffic picks up at 11 o'clock in the morning and goes on until 7 pretty strong. Doesn't really even die off until about 1 in the morning, and even then it stays, relatively strong all the way till about 6 a.m. and picks back up again. They're kind of mystified by this, considering that our website is completely built out of their stuff. So technically, it shouldn't have different readership patterns, but it does. Unfortunately, I can't tell them why. I don't know. I was surprised to find out that they didn't get traffic outside of 8 to 11 a.m., so I couldn't help them out much. But at any rate, a question that people usually ask me was there any one moment where the traffic really took off? And there really wasn't. There's only one that I can remember off the top of my head, actually two. One happened recently, but one that didn't happen recently was we got mentioned in Playboy in 2001. They have a little internet section, and some guy was just writing about his favorite internet sites and having to toss us in there, and we actually got a little bit of a spike out of that. But that and the one that we caused ourselves this past couple months ago, where we tried to buy the naming rights to the Fleet Center up in Boston and call it the Fark.com Duke Sucks Center. We ended up causing our own media spike through that. That was the only other thing that ever actually gained traffic. And what was amusing about that is that we've had an article written on us in Time Magazine, in USA Today, and a few other places, and have not seen any noticeable traffic from any of those at all, which is kind of amusing. The talk I wanted to give today was kind of an amalgamation of things that I've come across from running FARK. I've kind of seen some very odd patterns in the media after reading practically every news article that's come out since 1999. It's very similar to, in my memory anyway, the situation that I had where when I was in college, my junior year I spent in England. studying abroad. And that year, I did not see any of the movies that came out because they were in a 3-month delay and they all pretty much sucked anyways. But it's really always funny to me when I'm sitting around talking with friends about movies we've seen and somebody will go, "Oh, what about that one movie such and such with Christian Slater?" And I would be like, What are you talking about? And there's always this little hole in my memory from that period because I didn't go see anything except for Wayne's World 2, which, that's easy to forget. So as a result, though, I have this bizarre memory for current events that goes right up to February 1999 and then just drops off the face of the planet. If anything weird happened before that, the odds of me remembering are not high. Anything after, though, it scares me to death to find out that I can catch a repeat in my own head 2 or 3 years later that I see going up on the main page. Now, that having been said, the next question that's in probably some of your minds is, well, how do we end up with repeat articles on the page at all anyway, if that's the case? Well, we have repeat articles on the page because we're switching link picking guys. Usually I'm leaving on a trip or coming back from a trip, and we're switching up. And the other guys that pick the links don't tend to read the page when they're not actually picking the links, and so that's when that happens. But at any rate, just a few of the things I've noticed. One of the things is the media tends to reflect some very interesting and scary things about society. One of the things, which is pretty obvious, is people love violence, without a doubt. And it isn't just particular to the United States either. Japan, in particular, comes to mind as a culture that seems to enjoy violence. And if that offends any of you, tough shit. In particular, the outrage over the violence that you see in the news really kind of breaks down to the patterns that you see in the film industry, where people will get really bent out of shape over small children and dogs having violence committed on them, but people that doesn't really no one has a problem with that. My theory is because we're not exposed to it that much. It's one of those things where Hollywood's had a moratorium against harming dogs for a long time, and so when something like that actually occurs, people get really bent out of shape. Case in point, one of the articles on Fark from about 2 or 3 years ago was a guy whose neighbor's dog was running through his yard, and so he doused it with hot oil or something or other. I can't remember what the deal was. Didn't kill the dog, but it was a $13,000 medical bill, and we actually helped people raise money for that, and $8,000 of the $13,000 medical bill actually came from us to help the dog out. But then again, that engendered certain discussions about, well, why is everybody getting really excited about this, given the fact that there are so many other horrible things that happen? And that's just one of the peculiarities that I've noticed, and I think the media tends to reflect that. People tend to like a lot of sex, not surprisingly. It's not just the Europeans either. The Europeans just don't have any problem with it. In the United States, it's kind of like the way the joke that comes to mind was, what's the difference between Jews and Southern Baptists? And the Jews don't recognize Jesus Christ as the Lord our Savior, and Southern Baptists don't recognize each other in the bar on Saturday night. It's the same kind of thing. You would from hearing people talk, you wouldn't think that, just random people you would meet would be porn hounds, but according to our traffic records, everybody is, as it turns out. We can't generate anywhere near the amount of traffic that we can on a boobies link for any other news article about anything, period. Part of that has to do with the fact that our audience is so diverse, as opposed to, say, Slashdot's, which is very, tech-centric, and everybody's pretty much alike, and they tend to like mostly the same kind of tech-heavy articles. On Fark, you've got attorneys, I met some guys that run a fruit packing warehouse in Miami. Just the whole gamut of people from life situations, and any given news article is not going to attract that much attention. But boobs, though, that's universal. It's just interesting to me to see that it's one of those things that, it doesn't really come out. People try to pretend that that's not the main reason they go to Fark, but that's usually the second thing people will tell me. The first thing is, love the website. Second thing is, those boobies links are great. Yeah, I know. So, and a good example of this is that Charlotte.com, which is a website obviously out of Charlotte, North Carolina, did and to my knowledge, the only time they ever did this because of the complaints it generated, a best stories of 2001 based on the actual traffic, not the popularity of the actual site. And the number one link for the entire year, most of them were sex related anyways, but the number one link was a guy who beat his son senseless and ended up in jail because he found him out in the barn having sex with a family dog. That was the number one story of 2001. So along the same lines, I did a visit to the Screensavers earlier this year, and they asked me to pick up the best articles of 2004, and I thought, well, that should be too big. So I went and I pulled up the database and loaded it up in order of traffic, and I found There was one, I don't remember the, oh yeah, it was Janet Jackson's boob was number one based on traffic. But then number two, after excluding all of the boobies links, was like 2,000 links down in the cycle. No joke. And I can't even remember what it was now. But at any rate, so it ended up being one of those things where I just had to completely just make that list up because there was just no accounting for taste. So. People also like funny news, and by funny news, I mean not necessarily news that is funny, but news that is filtered funny. People would much rather be reading the weird stuff than the real stuff, which is probably what I would credit most of our traffic coming from. I mean, not only are we're not just doing real news, we're doing straight news, but then filtering it through a weird filter. Basically, though, we've also been seeing patterns in the media where they've been drifting that direction themselves. For example, CNN now at any given time during the day has one or two links in their top 6 that'll be, you know, like finger found in Wendy's chili. Now, I don't understand why on CNN that orders that amount of attention. I mean, with us, you know, that's a big story, but with CNN, where you've got, you know, 5 or 6 links to basically cover all of the news that's even worth seeing, they've always devoted that last one to something completely bizarro, and in some cases, the last 2. Strangely enough, we had a database outage this week, and we lost 2 days worth of data, which was, you know, no big deal as far as I'm concerned. But we ended up having 2 days worth of total FARC subscriptions evaporate because the PayPal system will continue to try to send them if it doesn't get any kind of reaction off of our database. But our database did react, and then it blew up. So I had to go back and back out all those transactions. Turns out on April 6th, there was a sign up from a PayPal account named CNN, with a guy whose email address was at Turner.com that signed up for it, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I wonder what those guys are doing. I have a contact over at CNN. I asked him if he knew who that was, and he's like, no. He's like, that's just probably just some other news writer that's looking to kill, you know, 12 hours of his 16-hour workday by not doing anything. Another conversation I've had in the last few years is with IOL, which is it's a news organization based out of South Africa, and they were telling me that they had made a decision based on the traffic they were just getting from us to skew their entire newspaper towards the more weird news because that was getting more traffic than anything else. They can't possibly be the only guys that have made that decision, in my opinion. The only other news organization that I can think of that's kind of gone that route, but not really, would be Aftenposten in Norway. But they live in Norway, and people are a little crazy up there because the sun's not out too much during the winter, and it makes them go a little nutty. So I don't think they're trying to find weird news up there. I think they just have it. I mean, it's an odd, fun little country. By the way, too, if anybody at any time has any questions, feel free to stop me. I'm more just up here rambling than anything else. You're not going to break my concentration or anything. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You talking about the Russian FARC? Oh, different one, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Pravda sometimes. Pravda had a funny conversation. I actually went and visited those guys a few years ago, and we were sitting around, and they said that they had noticed not only the weird news thing, but even the shit they completely make up, like aliens landing or, you know, strange ghosts walking around in the street. They just write those and post them occasionally. They say that gets more traffic than anything that they ever post too. They're just kind of confused by it as well. But of course, in Russia, apparently it's okay to just make shit up, and no one will call you on it. One of the interesting things that I've been seeing that I did not know existed before is what I call the pattern of story dispersion in the media, where something actually occurs and then how does it get to the media, and then once it gets to the media, how does it thrive and how does it move on? As far as how does it get to the media, that's a very interesting thing. There are a couple ways. Basically, rarely does a story reach the media that they weren't tipped off about. Rarely. The story that comes to mind was this past Christmas, where the parents were upset at the behavior of their children, so they went and moved out on the front lawn for a while. Now, how the media found out about that, either someone who's living in the neighborhood or they called specifically to try to draw attention to themselves, it's hard to say. But the other way that things get into the media is that they will send press releases with bullshit studies. And every single one of you in this room has seen several and probably not even known it. A good example of one that keeps coming back around year after year, because I think the same guys keep sending the same press release out, is the one about how Germans have smaller penises. Have you guys seen that one? They talk about how condom manufacturers are frustrated because they have to make them in a smaller size for Germany. Every time that sucker comes around, it's like almost on a yearly basis. I always wondered who the hell actually ran that study. I find it really suspect is what it boils down to. That doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense.